Hi, good morning, everybody. I just want to thank you for joining us with our table talk today. And today, this topic was set aside last week, but we didn't know how strong it would have an impact on the in wake of recent news. Just the treatment of Black individuals versus white individuals by America's justice system. And so our justice system incorporates so many different levels, be it starting, with your police officers all the way up into the courthouse with paralegals, prosecutors, judges, and then going into the prison system. And so it's a wide range of different situations that every person in America is going to have to face. However, we just have to talk about the difference in treatment when everybody starts to face them. So we're going to go ahead and introduce our panel speaking today. I'm just going to look at the first name I see on my list and start off with Chris Lee. And after that, everybody can just go ahead and jump in and introduce themselves to everyone.
Well, hey, good morning to everybody. My name is Chris Lee. I am a sports anchor at WRAL News in Raleigh, North Carolina. Growing up in North Carolina pretty much my entire life. And, I've also I've never been arrested, but I've been stopped numerous times without getting a ticket, but, just being questioned and being asked to step out my car and different things. So I kind of know a little bit what it's like to go through a few things. Luckily, it's never been like anything kind of crazy. I'm very much so passionate with issues dealing with race just because of the things that I've witnessed or the things that my parents have witnessed in their lives. So I'm definitely glad to be here and to have this talk. Thank you for inviting me, Dominique.
No problem.
I guess I can go. My name is Bakira Shabazz, and I'm out of the state of Virginia. I am the founder of First Alliance Consulting and Criminal and Justice Reform Network. My work kind of intersects with environmental injustice and criminal injustice, also a little housing injustice. And what's interesting is that I am a formerly incarcerated Black woman in the United States of America who has seen the racist impacts of profiling, also the impacts of trying to assimilate, Black officers trying to assimilate into a culture that does not accept them as well. And so they are constantly trying to be accepted into a world that was never built to allow them to acclimate into that system. Once you learn about where the police force comes from, I think we can start to have a better conversation about policing and why it is the way that it is today.
Thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you.
All right,
Good morning, my name. Good morning. My name is Dominique Kim. I'm an attorney that I've been practicing for around 11 years. I started off in the Raleigh-Durham area. I'm currently in the Charlotte area. I work for the Freedmen Law, which is a personal thing and also a professional thing. I started kind of a series of stories called 30 Before 30, and I was talking about significant police interactions before reaching the age of 30, being a Black male. And I want to take some of my introduction time to refer everybody to this website. It's called opendatapolicing.com/NC as agency, and then go to agency/225 and agency/52. These are statistics for Raleigh and Charlotte talking about police interactions. Once again, that's opendatapolicing.com/NC/agency/225 for Raleigh and /52 for Charlotte.
Okay, definitely. And if you have the opportunity, just in case people didn't catch all that information, if you could leave those website links in the chat.
Good morning. My name is Hannah Smith. I am the Executive Director for School Support for Johnston County Schools. I see on the school side, we have a great over-identification of Black males for special education and under-identification of Black males for gifted education. And I work really hard on that piece in trying to decrease those gaps and the predictability on that side. Personally, I'm a mom. And this just equity is just huge for me. I have been a wife to a Black man, and just seeing the treatment between me driving a car and having an issue and not being stopped, and then him driving the exact same car and being stopped in that. And so there definitely are injustices in our society. So I look forward to today's conversation.
Morning, everyone. My name is Garrett Razik. I'm a resident of Southern Wake County. I'm a former elementary school teacher. I used to teach in Newark, New Jersey. Now I work for a local nonprofit that tries to build more equitable local economies in various cities across the U.S. But I come here today as a community organizer, particularly working on the issues of gentrification, environmental justice, and economic justice, and how racial justice fits into all three of those buckets. I came here to Wake County just over 5 years ago. And I really started to notice the damage that HOAs, homeowner associations, were doing in the area. How they were largely white spaces, and they were often calling the police on Black and brown children coming through communities, posting online, seeing suspicious activity, kids who would come to the basketball court or a public playground in that space. And so I started to get to work there, and recently I partnered with a local nonprofit to try to strategically deliver implicit bias trainings on the people who are making the phone calls to the police, to make sure that we have folks in every HOA who's ready to confront bias in action and stop that dangerous moment from ever occurring. And so I'm involved in a couple other issues locally, but really delighted and honored to be here with you all.
Okay, that's great. And thank you once again for everybody joining us today. This morning, I actually, I released an article about my case because every morning that we wake up, I don't know about the rest of you all, but I'm always scared to open my social media because I don't know what happened. Like, I don't know what happened last night. I don't know what Trump just tweeted. I don't know, what backlash is going on in society. But it made me realize, like a conversation, like that article says, I had it with one of my friends, and he was like, why don't you talk about your story anymore? Why don't you tell people about your case anymore? And it's just like, well, I've already put myself out there. I created a podcast. I told people the story, if they have a reference for it. But he said, that's not enough. And he was like, you don't even understand the power of your story, because I was locked up in prison for 5 years for a crime I didn't commit. I did have eyewitnesses testifying that it was a white driver, not a Black individual. I did pay $40,000 for an attorney who asked for additional $30,000 for me to go to trial. I did hire another attorney fighting for, my freedom once I was incarcerated. We provided him with eyewitness statements, affidavits, facts, calling him out, showing you how I have ineffective assistance of counsel. None of it enough because you've already signed a plea. Had you gone to trial, maybe you would have won. Maybe you would have got out. And so at this point, there's nothing that I can even do. I've leveraged every loophole that there is to obtain my innocence, and they will still find reasons to tell me it's too late. You can't get that back. And you go through this and you start looking at other news articles, and you start seeing other guys that were charged in your same county that are white that didn't even get a DUI charge. And you start witnessing other incidents. This astronaut, James Halsell, he killed 2 girls in a car accident that he refused to give a breathalyzer for 4 years ago, and he's still free right now. Like, you're out on bond, pushing cases back. And so I just sit there and I try to find other differences to say, oh, that's because I'm Black and they're white. But what other reason is there? Like, what other excuse do you have when you start pulling out all the facts and saying, why would this happen to you versus, them? And so then you sit up there, and recently we had the case with, Rayshard Brooks. I'm not sure exactly how you say his first name. I don't know. Has everybody been able to see any parts of the video with this gentleman? I
refuse to watch the video, honestly, because I'm tired of watching people getting killed on camera.
I understand. I asked that question only because I was only able to watch the beginning of it, and he's speaking so calmly and diplomatically and expressing himself and, telling the officers exactly, what's going on. This is what I can do to happen. And you're not understanding how at the end of that conversation, somebody dies. And this morning, someone highlights another article for me. It happened 5 months ago, but there was a guy rummaging through cars, running from the police officers, stealing a gun, and this man is alive. He's white. When do we start, or what steps do we have to start taking in order for, you know, society to realize this keeps happening, and it has, like, what do we do to change it? Not so much acknowledge it.
Well, I'll step in. I know that just being somebody, and I'll take it from a different perspective.
Start,
You can go ahead, Dominique.
I was going to say, so there's a lot of different things in the legal system that I think people kind of miss. I'll kind of walk through some of those. This is a mostly white male-dominated field. And then you're talking about who becomes the judges. Typically, that also ends up being a white male that comes from that. There's a difference between creating laws and creating legislation that can kind of help people and kind of change some things, and then the people who interpret those things. So as an attorney, and also in other areas I've seen where there's just either a culture, there's this lack of understanding that sometimes come from having lack of diversity at the bench. And before going a little deeper, I'll just kind of summarize and maybe come back to this. There's simple things that we're talking about. Most cases are played out. Most cases are handled by prosecutors. In North Carolina, for example, I'm gonna say around 9% of black people are attorneys. It's only 9%. In the nation, it's a little bit less than that. So we talk about who's advocating and then who you're advocating to. And even if you have a law that's actually intending to try to address some of these inequities, there's still the application of whether it applies, whether the prosecutor thinks that this is a situation that it applies to, and whether a judge accepts that. And so those are some of the issues where we're talking about diversity in the profession, not just of actually having token persons, but people actually understand and see things from different perspectives. And I want to come back to that, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
I think that was important to highlight. For me, doing the work, the legal work on the other side of an attorney, what is so biased to me is that we don't look at who wrote these laws in the first place. You can't have a place of equity or equality when the laws were written by somebody that was trying to oppress you in the first place. And then they give themselves loopholes out of accountability and liability. And we never have these conversations. It's like, look, you always are going to create a space to not hold yourself accountable. If I'm the judge, and what we see in these courtrooms, that these judges have these egos that they are the authority and they have the right to do whatever they want to do when they don't. But who gonna check them? You never see attorneys filing complaints on judges. You never see attorneys filing complaints on other attorneys when their ethics and their responsibilities say that they are supposed to. And so you look and see, like, well, are these attorneys afraid of their careers, or what's really going on here that we're not having attorneys that are really, really fighting to protect people's rights? And one other thing, and I'm gonna yield the floor, we all say, oh, this is your right, this is your right. But what we don't understand is that it has to be well established. Your right has to be well established in order for you to affect it in court. And so if it's not something that has been well established in precedent, you still may lose your case. And you can be right, but if it's not well established, the judge will be like, well, I can't do anything at this point. It wasn't well established.
So I think a lot about, and there are many people on this call who are working to reform the system. And I think often about, since the system is so full of rot, stopping folks from getting the system from the get-go. Because Michelle Alexander in the New Jim Crow talks about like the 3 steps, right? There's like the roundup, where police are incentivized financially to police Black and brown communities. There's the conviction, where folks are denied meaningful representation. Prosecutors, as Dominique said, pressure plea agreements. And then there's the invisible punishment after, the sanctions when it comes to once folks are trying to reenter, when it comes to housing, employment, engaging in their civic duties, and these number of sanctions that are imposed on individuals. So like I focus a lot on how do we stop the roundup part initially, because what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of, and I'm often looking at suburbs right now, because we look at historically about white flight to the suburbs, and now suburbs are getting increasingly racially and ethnically diverse. Seeing their response in this moment in time, and a lot of them gravitating towards body cameras as the end-all be-all solution to everything, and not going deeper than that. And so what my focus is on is really going in tandem with folks reforming the system to prevent that roundup from ever happening strategically, by making sure that there are folks in the community aware of these issues and confronting them to make sure folks never enter the system.
Okay, so you mentioned and highlighted like body cameras and how everybody feels like that's the answer for everything. However, you have these police officers that are very aware that they have these body cameras on and are still committing these acts flagrantly. How does everyone feel about that?
So I remember when they were passing this law, and I was telling people that this is a great intermediate step, but this isn't going to solve anything. What is the recourse for not using the body cam? Different departments have different rules. Sometimes they punish officers, sometimes they don't. And on top of that, even if someone is actually have their rights violated, which I used to do know your rights talks, and then one of the things that was frustrating was, even if you know your rights and you're violated, what recourse do you have? So there's now conversations that are being had about qualified immunity, the difficulty that is in trying to prosecute an officer for doing something wrong, and why we should end qualified immunity. So when you have something that happens, so say for example, there's had a bunch of cases where people put over for basic traffic stops. And so there's some kind of infraction. And then this is also reflected in the data that I sent to opendatapolicing.com. You have a basic traffic stop, and then this person is pulled out of the car or asked to move out of the car for different reasons. If you already instinctually don't trust a police officer and you know that this is a basic stop for something traffic related, why are you being pulled out the car? It's a very fearful situation for some people, whereas for other people, that may not be a situation that causes their alarms to rise at all. But an officer does, under the law, have the opportunity to ask you to come out, and they can say, officer, safety, and then if you don't come out, then it becomes an issue where you can get hit with resisting. And so you're hit with these penalties for fearing for your safety and trying to protect yourself and yourself in court. Because as Mr. Shabazz said earlier, the way that these laws are structured and set up, you really have very limited recourse unless the law is well established, that every officer should have known that there was no reason for this to happen, that there was no reason, this was not reasonable at all. And then that's just a very difficult standard, which affects negotiations when you sue the police. It affects the outcome if you go to trial, if you ever make it to trial. So there's all these barriers built in between that were systematically input. And as Mr. Razik said, the collateral consequences of just being charged or have this seen in the news, even if you beat the charge, your mugshot is up until you get that expunction, which takes some time. So it's a whole system that comes to play, which disaffects people. Negatively affects people, whether it be in the school system, whether it be trying to apply for jobs. There's all these things that happen from this one interaction. And if you do ever get the time to clear your name and prove that you're innocent, you have to sit for that so long that by the time it gets to trial, it's better for you in the short term. Hey, maybe I should just take this plea for credit for time served. And that's just a cyclical thing that we're talking about. And I'll yield the floor at this time.
Yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree. And thank you for that. And if like the brother said, if there is no punitive damages for not wearing your body cam, then I'm not going to wear it. Or even if I do wear it and there's still no punitive damages, then I can have it on. And like we see every day, these murders are happening. But again, if the law gives a loophole for them to be able to get away out, whether they say, oh, I think he had a gun, or he lunged at me, I feared for my life, all of these things, these excuses, we got to look at the police as, you are a trained individual that is supposed to know how to deal with this situation. Anytime that you fear for your life, at that very point, you should not go try to kill somebody. You should get in your car, drive away, turn in your gun, and go home. Because you become a danger in that fear. You know what I'm saying? The fear debilitates you from being able to think rationally a lot of times. And so at that point, when you say fear, it's time to cut it off, and you gotta go. You gotta turn in for the day. And that's not something that we have demanded nor asked at this point in time. I think we need to start making our demands known when it comes to policing, and when we talk about holding people accountable, the law is the only thing that would allow us to do that. And if it's not prescribed in it, then we don't have that recourse. So that's what we have to fix.
Okay, so Chris, I'm gonna talk to you real quick because I naturally carry the fear right now. I was telling them last week I won't go protest any longer because I don't know the reactions from the police officers. I have a felony on my record right now and I'm still on probation. So I don't want those problems right now. Like, I'm not trying to get locked up. I'm not going back to prison for anybody. I don't know how you even flip it. So that's like my fear. I have anxiety for that. Like, it makes me nervous when I see a cop car riding by and I'm doing the speed limit. What's something like you fear? Like, do you ever get like nervous, or like, do you ever like fear like, oh man, this might go left?
Always. It never not happens. It was something recently. What was it? Oh, it was when Raleigh had their curfew. It was a couple of weeks ago, and I'm leaving the news station because the 11 o'clock news goes off at 11:30. So naturally, I'm going to be on the road at 11:45. And so as I'm making a left on Western Boulevard, I did see a police officer go down Avent Ferry to do a U-turn. And I don't know if he was coming for me, but he turned right on Avent Ferry just to make a U-turn going towards my direction. But luckily the light had already gone for me and it was red by the time he would have approached it. So I didn't know what that was about because it looked kind of weird. And I was like, oh man, here we go. And luckily, I didn't have that situation. Luckily, it's been a while since I've had to deal with that. And I think a lot of it has had to do with where I'm at in life, where, I think coming from the Triad area, being somebody who was on television over there and being kind of recognized, I've seen the situations where somebody sees, maybe they come up towards me, they look, okay, this is a black guy, they tail back, go behind me, that normal move, and then they're looking at my tags. And so like you kind of get used to it. And then so I've been in the Triad long enough to where maybe if somebody looks at my tags are fine, but they also may recognize the name because I don't have a different name. And so then all of a sudden, they're doing their check and then they kind of tail off and I go about my day. And I'm thinking that didn't happen to me before when I was just in college. Even when my tags were great, I would still get stopped for something. And so now I look at it as like I have a little bit of a privilege a lot of times right now just because of what my position is. But it still makes me afraid every single day, even though it hasn't happened in 8 years.
Yeah, that makes me think of a time I specifically make it a point. I told my mom I'll probably be buying cars in her name for the rest of my life unless I get my record expunged. Because that police officers pull up. I was leaving work one day coming from Raleigh off of Pool Road. And the police car came behind me and would not get from behind me. Like, if you're driving the speed limit and you're driving like right behind me next to it, I know like you're following me and you're running my tags and you're looking for something. Luckily, you're looking under my mother's name. She's a saint and citizen of the world. So you have no reason to pull me over. There's nothing wrong with the tags. There's nothing wrong with the insurance. But it just it put fear in my heart because it's like, yo, if you ran my name, and my aggravated assault with a deadly weapon charge popped up and you don't get to see car accident, how are you about to act with that? What are you about to do? Like, you now have the authority to come into my car because I'm still on probation. So you don't need a search warrant to look through stuff. You don't need a search warrant to, find whatever you can go through. Like, what are you going to do? And so I feel like people that are in law enforcement need to take those things into consideration when engaging with the public. Because it's just not acceptable. There's a lot of conversations now that are going on Facebook and, they're saying, oh, we need white protest because this man was, unjustly shot by the cops. Or, you know, white people get shot by the cops every day as well, like in the wrong situations. Why isn't anybody protesting for us? What are your thoughts on that slant of the argument?
Well, for me, when you look at the fact that we are 12.3% of the population and declining, I think the conversation now should spin to why are we not considered an endangered species? When you look at how animals are, put into the endangered species category, and actually that is one of the demands of my organization, is that we are presenting legislation to include Blacks as an endangered species. Just by the fact of what this country's fabric is, what it needs to feed off of, and what it won't acknowledge and accept. And in not acknowledging and accepting its part in the degradation of Black folk, then it continues. And then we have a lot of white people that are saying Black on Black crime. Well, let me tell you why Black on Black crime doesn't exist, so we can stop hearing this. You never hear a Black person say, I killed another Black person because they were Black. So there is no such thing as Black on Black crime. White on Black crime exists because a lot of times white people kill Black people because we're Black. There's some hatred there. We don't live the same. We don't have the same history. And then they want us to forget what has happened and what continues to happen today. I don't have to have on chains and be in a cotton field in order for slavery to still exist. We know it exists in other forms, and not having those conversations out loud continues to allow those people to say those ignorant things.
So a couple of thoughts here is, like, need we say Black on Black crime? Like, it's just, as opposed to just crime. Like, do we call it white on white crime? No, we just call it crime. Like, anyway, when crime happens, people go to jail. Whereas when police brutality happens, that is a government issued pass that is taking advantage of an abuse of power that doesn't serve time. So that's the difference between crime and police brutality. Like, there's a difference between those things. And I think so whenever we separate down, whenever you ask about like police brutality, and they want to separate that from race, but most people commit crimes against those that they know or live near them. And, you know, a lot of people attribute crime rates that are higher among the Black community than white, when in reality, it's a higher correlation with poverty than it is necessarily race. Now, we know that in poverty, that's significantly higher in our African American community, but it is with poverty. But it goes back to like, why you're exactly right. Like, a lot of people are trying to throw out Black on Black crime, but why are we even doing that? Like, why do we have to say it's Black on Black crime? Like, it's about crime, but a lot of people in the white community is trying to throw it out versus police brutality. Like, those are two completely separate issues here. Whenever crime happens, we prosecute that and they go to jail. Police brutality is, we're taking advantage of the power that we're given by the government. And they don't, many times they're not serving time. Many times they're maybe fired, but they're like, a lot of times they're not fired, much less justice is not served for the crime that they commit.
So I have a question directed towards Dominique, because one of the things that triggered me the most when I came home is Amber Geiger. We love her, right? She was sentenced to 10 years for walking into a Black man's home and killing him. Yeah, that's simple. That's straightforward. Walking into someone else's house and killing him. 10 years. In the state of Texas, you are required to do 50% of your time. By the time Amber Geiger is done with her sentence, she will do 5 years. I have issues with that because I, as an innocent person, spent 5 years of my life in prison. Why are we doing the same amount of time? So, even if you would like to say that I was guilty of my car accident, nobody died. And so it's just like, what are the steps that are preventing true, justice with other people in elevated positions in life?
So, even going beyond Amber Geiger, let's take a look at Oscar Grant. I think that officer served around 2 years for manslaughter. There was a shooting in New York where an officer discharged and he was convicted of manslaughter. I think he got like a year and some change. So these are things that aren't necessarily new. Hers, I think, was actually, which is, as far as I know, I could be wrong. I think hers was one of the longer sentences for what I've seen. I do know in the state of North Carolina, we have a sentencing grade where you have a basic criminal, whatever your criminal history is, and then the level of offense. And then based on that, they say, this is the range of what we're willing to give you. And then the judge has some discretion within that range. They consider all these things, and whatever that judge considered, I can't say, I can't speak of. But also, like we talk about, some of it starts with what they decide to prosecute in the first place. So if we only charge you for manslaughter, we can't bring you up to murder. But if we charge you with murder, we can bring you down to manslaughter. So what they would say is that officers typically have clean records, otherwise you will be on the force, you've done all this service, all these things. And so those are things that someone may reason as being a good reason why this officer should not serve as much time. Under Amber Geiger's case, I just can't, I don't understand it. I don't really see it. When you talk about the cover up, the kind of delay, there's all these things that kind of show lack of remorse in addition to how it happened. I'm not saying I believe the officer who killed Officer Grant. I'm not saying I believe the other officers, but at least they were saying this was a quicker moment and there was more room for it to be explained versus her explanation just didn't make any sense. So when we talk about the sentencing part, I'm kind of dumbfounded on all the laws in Texas and why that judge only found that amount of time to be sentenced. But I do think that when you start seeing more severe charges without having to put the pressure, public pressure on it, without having to go to a grand jury, we just see prosecutors who feel free and comfortable enough, which there's a difficult relationship for prosecutors because they work for police. They rely on police.
Right.
And so even here in Charlotte, we've had issues where the previous head DA decided to recuse himself, and Governor Cooper, the Attorney General at the time, was trying to prosecute a case because that prosecutor didn't feel comfortable handling the case because of relationship with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police. And so Governor Cooper had to step in and kind of litigate a case when that's not necessarily what they typically do. You have experienced prosecutors for that, and they're not willing to do their jobs. And they need to be replaced by people who are willing to do their jobs. Mm-hmm. And this is an elected position. However, how many people know who the elected DA is in their jurisdiction? And then how many people actually reach out and kind of hold them accountable? These are things that as every member of the public should start engaging in these things, because for the most part, these people run unopposed. Why do they run unopposed? Because most of the most of the DAs in the office who would run for that, you need some DA experience. So are you going to run against your boss, and then if you lose, where are you going to work now if you run against your boss? Mm-hmm. So you have to wait for this person that's going to sit whenever they leave. You see some of the DAs have been here until they decide to retire because it's difficult to replace a DA, except in Durham where sometimes, there have been some scandals because that person needs to typically come from the DA's office. You don't want to see someone, or people typically don't want to see someone who came from the public defender's office now working in the DA's office. So those are some of the things we talk about. The charging, I can't say what goes into the judges' minds, but as far as why they think that that's acceptable, I think the public would disagree in a lot of instances, but we're not the ones making that decision. But we need to create steps for how do we create accountability for those judges other than voting them out at whatever interval where that vote comes.
Right. I certainly agree with that. And I want to take us back to Trayvon Martin, who was walked down and murdered. And this was a child. And we see George Zimmerman just acting a fool still. And I do not understand at all how he was able to get off, because he was an aggressor. He was the actual aggressor. They told him, do not follow. And he still did it, and he still got off. And so, and when for staying your own ground, you can't incite, and I'm gonna just use a riot, incite a riot, then the riot comes and beats you up, and now you want to stay in your own ground with the gun, knowing that the other person has absolutely no weapons, in fact, has Skittles and a drink. I don't know how we justify these things, but what I do know is that color matters. That's what we do know. And so we have to start going in and undoing, and now is the time. All of these laws that allow these things to happen, that have all of these loopholes, that allow people to abscond responsibility. Because what we do know is that we are not allowed those same loopholes. And I'm talking about we as in Black people. even those with money we've seen go down, and it's just absolutely ridiculous at this point.
I think about Brock Turner, and it wasn't, I guess you can call rape violent, but he only did like a few months in jail, and then the judges kind of says, well, he has a bright future ahead of him. I don't want to ruin his life.
Right.
And I think about your situation, Dom, and how long we've known each other, and it's like, wow, somebody couldn't look at you and think the same thing about you, even if like the situation was kind of murky at the end of the day. And so I think that's a lot of where it comes down to is a lot of people just don't look at Black people with the same value. There's not a lot of value on our lives of what we can contribute to the population as a whole. And I think a lot of that needs to be addressed, even down to the school systems. I can even remember times being, treated differently, being the only Black kid in the AP class and singled out for things that never happened. And it's like, why are you constantly like looking at me for something? But I know homeboy down there is cheating, and you never catch him. But like I scratched my arm a little bit, and then all of a sudden, Chris, what are you doing? And it's one of those things where like, I've been used to that my entire life. But that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's how do we teach people that, their implicit biases play out everyday lives and in your everyday lives where you're telling Black people you do not matter as much as somebody who is a lot lighter than you.
It is.
I think for one, we need to stop giving them an out by saying diversity, equity, and inclusion is the out. Implicit bias is the out. If you know how to treat your people, then most certainly you know how to treat other people's. We give people an out all the time as Black people because by nature we are really forgiving and benefit of the doubt folks. That is embedded in our DNA, and I don't care who wants to refute it or whatever. But we do it and we see it all the time. And we saw it in that video as our brother tried to explain to the police that he wasn't doing anything, and they became aggressive on him, and they just should have allowed him to go to his sister's house. But we cannot continue to give people a way out. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is a farce, and so is implicit bias. Hold them accountable.
But my question of holding them accountable is like how? Like, because even like as like you guys were just talking, like I like started getting emotional about like, your viewpoint, because like I tell people all the time, I was raised to be confident in everything that I do by my parents. Being a military brat, there's just a certain thing that gets pushed in you from your parents. After the car accident, I never walked into a courthouse without one of my parents, and they're from North Carolina. That courthouse was in Arizona. Never did I ever. I had character letters written for me from everywhere. Having parents in the military, everybody. So, I'm looking real good on paper right now. From my personal references and other people's references, I did everything by the book. I'm there for school. I don't know how else to portray me. And you still like walking into court, they're still lying, making up priors on me. This is her third DUI. What? I don't have a DUI. I made it out of Greensboro, North Carolina without a DUI. I feel like I should just get like some praise for that. Like, I don't have a DUI. They're still sitting there. She's a villain to society. She's done this before. Done what before? What are y'all talking about? And I have my $40,000 lawyer not defending any of this. $40,000. Like, that is what I keep enforcing to people, to let them know, like, my value wasn't even enough for $40,000. How much more did I have to pay to be important?
Right.
Because all you had to do was little facts you needed to check, and I would have been okay. I would have never entered prison. But $40,000 wasn't enough for my life. And so you have to continue. We have to ask ourselves, okay, we understand that police are not, equipped with the right morals sometimes. I believe I saw that the killer of Tamir Rice was hired again as a police officer. I don't understand how you were hired again after that was a whole situation where your judgment should be in question. However, you have been hired back into the system. how do we effectively even create a solution to where this actually changes and it just doesn't sound like a wish list or, you know, a to-do checklist of things I have to teach my Black child to grow up in America?
So I think
For one, we have to take away the time limits, like with legal malpractice or with appeals, you got to do it with it, or like you have 30 days or you have 2 years to file a malpractice. It's absolutely ridiculous when sometimes you won't know until later down the line. It should not be a time frame on retribution when you have been treated unfairly, and they put a time frame on it just to abscond responsibility.
Go ahead, Hannah.
I was going to say, you were speaking to like morals. I mean, two things is, one, there is the accountability piece. Like, where is the accountability for just the system in general? Like, how are we even making these decisions for what system and structure we have in place? And then what's the accountability for that? There's also the beliefs. So how do we get at the beliefs for the people that are making these decisions? And so I think there are, you know, you spoke about, even Chris, you were talking about, you know, your experience as a student. So in the school system, we're working at the beliefs of our educators. How do we working through the beliefs with our administrators and our teachers? Because if we have got to get at their beliefs, get at what are your implicit biases? How do you truly think about your students so that you know how you treat them, how you are grouping your students and teaching your students, because that has great impact. And you think about your experience and how many students we have that are experiencing that every single day and how that impacts, you know, society. And, you know, you brought up, you know, the Brock Turner case, but I saw something recently like, with white people, we credit them with all the things they could become as a society, but with Black people, we discredit them with all the things they have done. And so when we think about changing beliefs, if we can change beliefs in society, it's true. We look at white people and Black people differently in society. We just do. And so I think there's the accountability that we have to look at, but it's also the beliefs that we have to look at as well.
Yeah, if you look up the story about James Hassell, I don't know how to say anybody's name. It's Halsell. All it does is keep reminding you that this is a good white man who was an astronaut. He was a great man. And he was an astronaut. Like, it doesn't discredit, like, and then he had a previous DUI in Los Angeles, but they will not allow that to be entered into the new case because we don't want to taint this new case with what he did in the past because he's an astronaut. What? He killed 2 children. That's what astronauts are capable of. So that needs to be the image displayed. But I have a question for you, Hannah, because you're saying that you're going through these structures with these teachers about, you know, just acknowledging their biases. But are you asking like specific questions? What bias do you hold against Black children? How do you treat white children differently in these situations? You know, if a Black child shows to be, you know, a single parent home or left behind, do you automatically categorize them into like a different classroom? Like, are the questions direct and specific to that?
That's a great question. So I would say we are getting there. And if Hannah Smith had her way, Hannah Smith would perhaps address that differently. But just as though there are systems and structures in every, the way that you approach things, you know, we have to go through loopholes, you know. So I would say it's also dependent upon, and this is not to say what's, for those that are watching, I'm not speaking for, you know, I mean, I'm speaking for Hannah Smith, not for a specific school system in general. When I answer this question, I would say that as I partner with administrators and I work in their schools, some administrators are perhaps more direct with how they want to work with their teachers, and others are not. And so I would say that it definitely depends. It definitely depends. And I would say also you then see the impact differently based on how the questions are asked and what types of activities or protocols that we do with the teachers.
And so Ms. Shabazz, building off that, Ms. Shabazz said earlier about this idea of the danger of throwing out these words like implicit bias and because they're often just things to check off. So you'll see now police departments issuing statements and companies saying that we've done DEI trainings, we hired a director, we've dove into our implicit biases. Police department said we have body cams, and so one thing we're seeing is the whitewashing to some extent of the Black Lives Matter movement, just like there was whitewashing with Dr. King's radical message of justice in white spaces. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in white spaces to push folks right now, because there's a battle playing out. I mean, just this past week, Trump put out 2 tweets. One said law and order in capital letters, and another said, do you think suburban women want to defund the police? I don't think so. And so there's definitely a battle right now to play into this idea of weaponizing the white woman with white males and in white spaces to respond. And so I think in a lot of white spaces, there needs to be that pushback and that challenging, saying that you can't just, we can't just feel like we can go home and we've done something wonderful because we've checked a couple boxes. I think there's an artist and activist named Bree Newsom Bass, who took down the Confederate flag in South Carolina. I think it was back in 2015. So she put out a tweet saying something like, if you have to train people not to kill me because I'm Black, I really prefer you just not give them the power to kill me at all, maybe. And so so we have to, so in white spaces, we have to make sure that, because right now you see everyone running away from this idea, defund the police. It's going to be chaos in white communities. And so we have to push back, particularly white folks in white spaces, on that message right now, because there's a battle playing out in terms of messaging.
Okay, go ahead, Dominique.
So I wanted to tackle a couple of things. You can legislate based on your feelings, but you can't legislate how people will feel. Some of what people are feeling and believing is so ingrained, we just have to rebuild the whole culture. So even if we change the laws and we say there's accountability, that's just going to let it come out. So when we talk about some of the stuff, and we talked about Black on Black crime kind of in a short and kind of disregarded, but yeah, there's a legacy of redlining. There's a whole path of how we got here that has to be addressed that we've never addressed. So even with some of these short-term fixes and some things that are proposed, such as the body cam, such as the removing qualified immunity, some of these things, even if you change these things, there's still an attitude that we have to change. That's the difficult part. So that's what is really at the root of it. And creating these laws kind of help give some justice after things happen, or kind of give some way so that people will feel that I can't be that bold about it, which that's the start, and we'll take that. But the real thing is the education. And I want to kind of tell this quick story. I went to North Carolina Central School of Law. It was around 45% Black, 45% white. We had an incident which created some racial tension. There was a discussion that was had, and there was a gentleman who spoke up as a part of a smaller subset who said, and this man, I think was around his 30s. He said he went to Chapel Hill and he went to high school, and he had never really been around Black folks until he got to law school. So you're talking about Chapel Hill being a major school and finishing high school. So he came from a place that he was willing to admit his ignorance and not really knowing things. But this man was also 30, and this is like his second or third degree. And he said, well, what is it that you want from me? And I said, well, it's nothing from you specifically, but I do find it troubling that you really don't know me. You really don't have any baseline of understanding how people think and process. And at least he was willing to admit that. What I've seen from police officers, what I've seen from the judges even, is I have all the answers. I've been doing this long enough. I came up in a separated, environment. And this man went to North Carolina Central, and he said, I don't have the answers. Imagine going to some of these schools that aren't HBCUs, where there are elite, where there are, you're a certain class or caliber, and these are the people who make the decisions, and they come from a different part of society that even normal white folks come from. And they think they have all the answers and aren't willing to listen. So that's another part of the discussion that needs to be had, is how connected are you to the community? How connected are you to people who live everyday life? And what I would submit that I've seen in a lot of places where you have judges who are higher up, you can kind of track some of the judges' past, but some of them have no basis and no touchstone as to what kind of goes on.
Can I add something to what Dom just said too, that I think is really important? I wrote a column last week for my news station about NASCAR banning the Confederate flag and how it was well past time. And of course, there's going to be blowback because I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so it was interesting because one of the guys that wrote me, one of his reasonings to have it is because he's been to races where he's seen Black men or Black people have the Confederate flag. So anything that I said didn't mean anything after that. And so I wanted to build on what Don was saying, was because like, even when people do feel like they've had some type of interaction, they'll take one interaction or the interaction that they agree with somebody of a separate race and use that to frame it as this is what other people are supposed to think like. So why did I see one Black man in Darlington with a Confederate flag and he's fine with it, but you're not fine with it? Why is that? and so I think, you know, going back to, you know, whatever bias training, yes, you need experience too, but also people need to realize that don't treat, even though you need to know Black people, don't treat Black people as a monolith, because we do all think differently. We do all have different viewpoints on how we process things and how we look at things. You know, if we really dig deep, you know, Bakir, Ms. Shabazz and Dominique and me, we will disagree on something here. But we're all pretty much in line on this subject. And I think that's also something that needs to be talked about, is the racism within that of, you know, just because this one Black person, this one Asian person, this one gay person told me this about their experience, yours should be the exact same as theirs.
I agree completely with
And
that.
also, we shouldn't.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's our responsibility to change people's minds. For me, I don't need anybody to tell me how to treat, you know, anybody. I guess I was raised right, and even outside of that, I have a higher being that I would like to see one day, and so I want to treat people like I want to be treated. It's not something that I was taught to do. It's just what I want to be. And so if I don't have a problem per se with racism, I have a problem when you try to do something to me with it. So you can hold your own, because I don't want anybody trying to come in my face and make me be what they want me to be. So you can hold your own. Just don't bring it over here to me. My problem is when you bring your racist antics into public spaces like courtrooms and classrooms and any other public places. You know, that's when I have a problem, when you're going to portray that against somebody, when you use that against somebody. And that's what I need to get out, you know, get those people out of the system. That's my only job. You can be racist all day, but you're not going to work in a public space and be racist. So it's not my responsibility to teach you how to treat Black people. If you don't know, I already know who you are. You know what I'm saying? I respect. What I respect about Trump is that he tells us who he is. I'd rather you tell me who you are than you be an undercover racist and I accept you into my space and you're digging a knife in my back. So if I can see who you are, I know how to better respond to that, and I can appreciate that, and I honor that. You know, and I think we need to get to a place where we can be honest about those type of things. Racism has made me extremely prejudiced, so I'm honest about that. I also know that in my study, I didn't really consider other ethnicities. That was it wasn't on purpose. It's just that I was so consumed with my own people's issues that I didn't have time to pick up other folks' issues. But now that I'm seeing other things, and that they're wanting to join forces, we can. But I can't leave myself behind just to try to pull somebody else up. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna be honest about that part.
All right, so I have a brief comment, and then I have like our next question to like shift into. And just stating, like, you know, that all Black people don't respond the same, as Chris is saying. Like, we have different opinions. Me and Chris have probably gotten into several debates over things we didn't agree about during our friendship, but I've known him like my whole life. But the thing about it is, they get an okay from one Black person. What the latest Black person we can think of that's giving them the okay is Candace Owens, and they think it's okay. I've had so many, it's so funny because I get stereotyped so quickly by the white community, because Dominique, I've said it before on these talks, you're like the whitest Black girl I've ever met. Like, what? I'm sorry, what? How is that possible? And so the second that they have their black friend that's deemed it cool for them to say the N-word. And then you come around me because, oh, I have to be cool with it too. I'm not. And then they see this other side and then they're just like, oh, whoa, you're real black. Why did it take you disrespecting me for you to realize that I'm black? Like you don't get that pass. And so it's just like the white community really has to get it ingrained in their head that if you do get acceptance from whatever that black friend that allows you to do things that you know are not accepted in the community, keep that between you and that friend. Like if that white friend, that black friend says, yo, you can say the N-word anytime in my house, before you walk out that door, stop saying it.
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing I can tell you. I can't tell you what you can say around that person. I can tell you what you can say around me, and it's not acceptable. I had to get that off my chest because that's been bothering me my whole life. But that's just something that really needs to be understood. There's a lot of people that give themselves excuses. Oh, I can say the N-word because I have a mixed child, or I can say an N-word because I had sex with a black man. What does that mean? I can say the N-word because I grew up with nothing but black people. Well, then you need to say it around all of the black people that you grew up with. And once again,
Right.
not around me. And as like not even a smooth segue to the next one. The next thing that I really wanted to bring up and just talk about, just to see like, is it possible? So in San Francisco, they released that they're going to actually replace the police officers with trained individuals to respond to like non-criminal matters. That's their way of showing their step forward of, not having the police respond to everything. How do you guys think that actually is going to play out, and will that become contagious?
What are the non-criminal matters are they sending these people to? Like, get out of here.
So I work kind of in the mental health space and do guardianships as well. One of the things that I see is when people have crisis from bipolar, schizophrenia, or different things, oftentimes, unless there's someone that can advocate for them, the police are sent to kind of encounter this person who may be in crisis. So I think it's a wonderful thing. I think this is one of the parts of people talking about defunding and bringing people to the table who don't have guns, is when you have someone who's in crisis and kind of getting them to counseling. One of the most disturbing things that I've learned from doing federal practice, because state practice, they don't give you the same resources. But for federal practice, you get to see someone's mental health history and kind of what they're diagnosed with. And I've seen a higher than what I would have ever expected concentration of men who have struggled through school. They've kind of gone through their whole lives dealing with difficult situations, and later on after they have a long criminal record, this person has bipolar schizophrenia. This person has ODD. This person has ADD. All of these things that has happened before them, kind of you see this thing being ignored, and then when it finally gets to the point, it's too late. By the time you're in the federal system, nobody's really caring. You usually have a long criminal history. But at that crux of what they had was that we had a mental health issue that was never addressed. And then people don't know how to address that. We need to have more conversations around that. And I think it's great that San Francisco should do that. I think every jurisdiction should invest in that. That's something that a person with a gun does not need to respond to. That's something that someone with medical training, intervention training needs to know how to de-escalate that situation and make sure that that person doesn't hurt themselves or anybody else. And the last point I would say is we have no place to put people who have these crises. They usually get involuntarily committed, which means they'll stabilize and they'll get kicked out, or they'll put in the jail system, which is not a good place for them, especially they're not getting, there needs to be another place for people who are struggling with that. And it's more people than what the public generally thinks happens.
Dom, can I ask you a question?
Tell me this, lawyer. How will they be able to differentiate? My question and concern is, how will they be able to differentiate that? Because we do know that there's been instances where people did call that it was a mental health crisis that was happening inside of the home. But then we have, and I'm going to pay homage to Marcus Peters in Richmond, Virginia, who was having a mental health episode, and it was out in the public, and so people would deem that was criminal because it was impeding traffic and it was some other things that was going on, that they would give themselves out to say that there was also criminal behavior attached to it, and so therefore it was needed for the police to also respond. How do we draw that line and say, no, we don't want the police to respond to this thing, because they're going to make it so slim that I don't see how they're going to be able to differentiate the two.
Well, The first thing is we need to remove the stigma in general around persons who have these diagnoses. That's the first point. So someone can call and say this person has that. In Charlotte, we've had several people who were shot who were in crisis. We had one person who was killed in crisis. This has happened in different places throughout the country where that person is having crisis and is creating the criminal behavior. Now, as attorneys and defense attorneys particularly, we need to be able to identify and ask some of those questions to kind of understand why this person is off. I will never forget, I had a client who came to court. It was like 90 degrees. He had on a bubble jacket, like the first down jacket. He had glasses with no frames on, an earring. And this was my first time meeting him, but I knew immediately there was something that was wrong. And then just took the time to kind of sit to kind of see there's something that's not quite clicking here. Let's get him evaluated. Let's try to figure out what's going on. And defense attorneys need to take a better time to kind of take that time to slow down stuff. And prosecutors need to be aware that this isn't just a tactic. The understanding that the legal justice system, and I think kind of mirrors what the general public has, we're not up to date as we should on people who are struggling with these mental health issues and trying to get them the resources that they need. So the justice system is a problem, but also the general public is a problem because we're not giving this the resources and attention. So like you said, when a criminal charge does take, I do believe in certain places in the smaller areas where I work, it's actually more frightening to the judges and prosecutors that this person does have a mental health issue. So you have to look at that. If I bring that up, they'll say, well, you know, if we do this, he's just going to get out there and get off his meds and do this again. And they'll punish you double for that. So I do understand your, you know, your concern. Those are valid concerns.
Okay, Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, I guess it was similar. But I was going to ask if Dominique thinks that maybe like if when these situations are deployed, if there's somebody who can work with folks with mental health and a police officer and they're a team dealing with situations. So therefore, like if there is somebody, let's say who has a mental health episode, but happens to also have a weapon, that you have a person there who can know how to talk them down, but then also somebody that's there that can use it. Because I mean, there is use for police officers, you know, at the end of the day. So I didn't want to see if that was maybe something that maybe he thought was a good idea or how he thinks that should be, you know.
Now, I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe Charlotte does use a team where there is at least one officer, but there also is a mental health professional as well with somebody else. So I do believe that, for lack of better words, the officer can be there should something go wrong drastically. However, there are people who are trained who can kind of de-escalate the situation. And I do think the team approach is good, but you're talking about sending one officer versus 6 or 7 because so-and-so is doing whatever, which is erratic, is unexplained, those things. One officer should be enough just in case something goes wrong, and then kind of trying to figure out how to de-escalate that crisis, which first things first is getting people diagnosed so people know this person is not acting badly because they want to, they're in crisis.
Mm-hmm. So how we address human
I have a
bipolar disorder?
Hold on, Akira, I'm gonna ask you. You about to jump in on this one, and I know it. So I'm listening to the conversation. I'm listening to the strategies. We're clearly outlining ways in which money can be allocated to better sources to handle situations. However, a lot of these measures taken into account would actually reduce the level of incarceration in America. It would actually slow down that transition into the prison system. It would actually slow down how many people are locked up in jails. I'm just being honest and a realist. I haven't stood behind the abolition of prison or whatever. I don't think that it's possible because it's tied to so many bank accounts. So even through promoting all of these ideas, that would reduce the amount of individuals, and that's messing with people's bank accounts, a lot of people's bank accounts. Do you think that would be the reason why none of these suggestions would ever go through? Anybody?
So in the Constitution, it says we the people, right? And so the reason why things have happened thus far the way it is because we the people have not taken our affairs seriously when it comes to who we put where. I think we very well have the means to break down that system if we strategize. If we leave it up to the powers that be, of course not. You know, they have a 90% commit rate, a contract. They have a contract for that. And so if you breach your contract, they're going to have to pay all of this money. So if the way things are, I don't think we are going to be able to, because they do have these contracts that are out there. So you're right.
I was gonna say, I think we eventually it can. I mean, it's not gonna take, it's not gonna happen next year. But when slavery was abolished, I think slavery was something like 90% of the South's economy or something like that. So it's gonna actually take, I hate saying it like this, it's gonna take some people dying out and a new generation being educated on issues to hopefully say that, morally, I don't know if I can put money into this. I will put my money elsewhere in ways where I can make money in a better way. And that's what I'm hoping for. I'm still hoping for the goodness of people. The folks who are still living, who have their bank accounts tied to it, we're probably gonna have to deal with that for our lifetimes.
Well, slavery was not abolished, but number one, I think we need to make that clear that slavery was not, you can't abolish something and still have it. So we got to stop saying that slavery was abolished. The 13th Amendment clearly states that slavery is still allowed. Anytime you have something allowed, it's not abolished by definition. And when we're talking about breaking out mass incarceration, where the slaves are, the actual slaves, the constitutional slaves, that's how they get, especially in the state of Virginia, our jail population creates everything that the state needs. And so it's free labor, it's peonage. Also, so I think we should consider our language.
Dominique, I know you took yours off mute. Go ahead.
So I think that when we talk about this moment, I think that if we were to continue this moment, where we're talking about a COVID crisis, where we're talking about people out of work, where we're talking about people have less things to go to, have less distractions everyday life. I think that the full engagement that was not necessarily full, but the higher level engagements right now are kind of tricky. Now, whenever we go back to whatever the baseline is, I would like to see if this energy still maintains. Because if this energy maintains, and this is how we were operating society, I think a lot of these things could have been tackled a long time ago. However, with some of the comforts and the trappings that we have and the distractions that we have, people don't focus and hit the streets like they're doing right now. People aren't interested in the issues. The George Floyd protests and some of the airtime and the videos wouldn't get that much views because you have sports to distract you, have this to distract you, have all these things that would be in the new news cycle. Right now, we're kind of in the slower news cycle and stuff because of COVID is kind of changing, I think, how everything is kind of reacted. So I want to know, personally, just kind of seeing, can this movement be sustained whenever stuff goes back to normal, whenever we have stuff that's going on that distracts us? Because as it's operating right now, I think that stuff is getting done. People are pushing for change. However, this is just a short period of time. But if we were active as citizens for this prolonged amount of time as we are right now, I think we could tackle those things. And we also have to set our sights higher. I'll accept defund if the goal is abolition and we have to move toward that. There's some steps, and I do understand that there are people who, just the concept of Islam is like defund. What is it? Okay, that just means reallocating resources. It's really not that complicated. Abolition, all right, let's tear this from the ground up and then just kind of do away with it and do something else. There are a lot of things which, without going too far, we talk about just legalizing marijuana, decriminalizing it, kind of taking, giving citations and summons instead of actually arresting people for traffic tickets and other things. These are all things that can kind of lower the jail population if they wanted to do that. And as people, we need to create and keep pushing and giving them further incentive and or penalties for not trying to move in that direction, like a lot of us are doing right now. But the one last thing I want to kind of add on is I have seen some white people who are actually more engaged. Now, the level of engagement and commitment, that remains to be seen how prolonged this is. But one of the things that I do want to highlight was the elderly man in Buffalo who was pushed down. And I've seen lots of protesters locally in Charlotte who have been assaulted and harassed by the police, and kind of seeing the bigger picture. Well, wait, maybe it's not just Black people. Maybe this is kind of a police thing. And of course, Black people are disproportionately policed, but at the same time, they're pushing old white men down and they're not caring about his life. They're tackling white male protesters. They're tackling people all across indiscriminately. Maybe we're really seeing how deep this problem goes.
I tell people all the time, look at how a person treats the janitor, and that's how they ultimately feel about you. And I make the correlation that, you know, in society, the people in prison are the janitors. That's how, like, the government is comfortable with treating individuals. That is like the worst condition I have ever lived in my life. To having to bother my mom and tell her about situations of waking up with bugs in my ear, and, you know, seeing the, you know, state of how the showers are, and the type of, literally there was packs of meat that came in packages in the kitchen that said not for human consumption, and they still cooked it and fed it to people. I mean, I was blessed, thank you Jesus, for my family. I was buying my own commissary, but you guys are still feeding that to individuals. And so for you to think that they are creating the system and allowing people to continually live in this system, broken as it is, but they actually care about your life and your life is different, that's not true. And so it's just like, you have to hold people accountable for how they are treating the janitor. And I do believe, like Chris said, that it's going to take time because it is tied to some old bank accounts. And I think LA said it the best last week when speaking to those white individuals who consider themselves, or they have the actions of like allies. This ain't a Girl Scout cookie badge. Like, this isn't, you know, this isn't something like we just handing out, you know, today, just so you can be like, okay, I made it on the team. This is something like we have to live and die every day. Like, this is something like you have to be, you have to embody, you have to embrace, and you have to walk through, and that is your nature. Like, we don't have to question it. Your actions speak louder than words. And like Dominique, I want to know how long, I'm a little skeptical, how long does this last? Because this is my line of work. What Chris does, and using his voice on the news station, that is what, like, his line of work. What Dominique is doing, fighting for justice and being a lawyer, that is his line. Bakura, with her nonprofit organizations as well, this is their line of work. How do we know that the rest of society is going to keep doing what they say they're going to do? That's my question.
We don't. We just keep doing what we have to do.
And I want to add, though, that I really do think it's on. I appreciate you saying it, Dominique, because I think I see many folks right now who assume that just because they have a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on, they have an ally card now for life, and I think they need to be checked. And we all understand that how we have to evolve with the system, and understanding how we fit into doing the work. And so I think that, I mean, one of the biggest dangers here, I'll say it again, is what Dr. King calls a moderate white here. And he describes them as preferring negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to positive peace, which is the presence of justice. So I think we're quickly going to enter a state, to Dominique's point, where there's going to be, focus is going to go to other things, and maybe even moderate rights would just say, you know what, it's all about voting, and then that's how I do my job. So I think it's on particularly white folks in white spaces to push them, to help them get folded in also to those who have been doing the work, particularly Black-led organizations and movements. Because right now you see a lot of folks white folks who are new to this work, who are really excited and saying, oh, I'm so excited, and they are connected to resources, and you see them getting the mic or getting the funds to do this work. And so I think right now is opportune time to pressure them to connect them to institutions doing the work, so that they remain connected. Get on that email list. Start connecting now, folks, so that they can't look away to their sports or wherever they might look after this.
Okay, so my question to Chris and Dominique and Bakura, because I was telling some people earlier on the warm-up call that I actually was exposed to something on my Facebook. There was a white lady basically saying, I posted a status basically saying, we got to stop explaining why Black Lives Matter. Like, they get it. If they don't, they're just racist. That's what it said. And so there was actually a white lady that commented underneath, and she was like, actually, I needed an analogy to learn. And her and this other lady went back and forth on my status. I let them have it. This y'all discussion. Because the Black lady was saying, yo, like, how did it take an analogy for you to understand that you should be smarter than that? Like, it should be common sense. However, the lady was like, no, she had to read this post basically saying this is how it helped her understand that she shouldn't, to responding by saying all lives matters is disrespectful. I'm super glad that there's like little memes and tricks things that are teaching, some people some things or whatever. However, do you guys feel that it is our responsibility every single day as murders continue to happen, like continue after George Floyd, continue to happen, to still remain in a position where we're educating people to understand why we're fighting?
Yes and no. Because no, it shouldn't be. It's not our responsibility. We shouldn't have to. But clearly there's, a lot of people in the nation where, they're just not, when they live their everyday lives. I was saying this on a podcast last week when I was being interviewed. I think the changes that we've seen, because this George Floyd isn't the first Black man we've seen lose his life on camera for no reason. He's not the first one. So what was it this time? And I think that a lot of it had to do with the pandemic. People aren't in their normal hamster wheel. They're not, they don't have the blinders on that they normally had on. And so now that they have gone through something, and just a few weeks prior, you're asking for a haircut. Now you see why other people have been protesting for other reasons for years. And so I think where we shouldn't have to, what that lady said was definitely profound and very true. There's a lot of people who do take I read White Fragility recently, and it's not just for white people, it's for Black people too, because it really explained my frustration and explained why I was going through these certain interactions with certain white friends before, when I'm trying to explain certain things to you. And that there is, for some people, that detachment from anything that's ever happened in the past, because that wasn't me. And even though that there are other things happening, but there was a Black president and there's Black millionaires, whatever, I have nothing to do with this, and so there is that detachment. So you kind of do need to keep using your voice, because then when things happen and you can be there to put it in perspective for somebody, that's a mind you can change.
And so for me, I do think it's our personal responsibility. It's like Chris said, I don't want to have to, and I particularly choose to engage with people who are willing to listen, who actually want to learn. It's no sense in wasting time with people who are already kind of committed and chose that this is the lane. If they want to actually have a conversation, cool. I'm all for that. And I think that one of the things that why I started doing the 30 Before 30 series, was just talking about how prevalent it is. I have the privilege of being in a lot of white spaces because I'm an attorney, and being in the room, and there's this otherization of, oh, you're kind of different than the rest. No, I still keep the do-rag in the briefcase like everybody else. I'm the same. You just happen to get to know me. So when we're talking about these things, about educating people and saying like, all right, well, no, I can see, and I know that there's not but so many degrees between some of the choices I made in my life and some of the choices that my clients have. And having that conversation with white people, there's not anything that's particularly, I want to say, there's a couple of degrees of separation between some decisions I made and my clients made. So speaking for someone who comes from this background, who comes from this place, this is what I would like for you to know, and to see that there's value in this person. This person has potential just like I have potential. I just got to actualize mine and have those conversations when people are willing to listen. And so that's my thing, is being around a different crowd, I can have those conversations. And I'm always willing to have those conversations if they're actually conversations.
And what does that really mean? Like,
what specifically?
Because you're different because you're an attorney, and we get that a lot of times. You're not like the rest of them. You don't think like the rest of. I hate that, because I can go either way. I can be street, and then I can go into the General Assembly or in the Congress and say whatever I need to say. So I don't understand what they mean when they say things like that. Like, and I'm not degreed, but I've studied the law for 23 years, and so I know it probably better than a lot of attorneys, and they have said that as well. But I'm back in school now, so I can go and get what they say I need to be able to do this work. But even in just saying that. You know, it's crazy. It's like, what you mean?
Well, I think to a
Like you
certain
can't be a
extent,
regular and an attorney? Like,
no, I think we're kind of a victim. So Black people code switch. We kind of assimilate some of the norms to kind of, maintain that professional. And then sometimes white people believe or put too much stock into it. They don't see the other side of what I look like on Saturday and Sunday and how you carry it. Because for different reasons, we choose not to show that side. We don't want to have to deal with what it comes with that. So there's a lot of different ways in which people think that, okay, you carry this quote unquote polishment, you speak this way, you do this, you do that, which is different from the person or your client. Even though we have the same equal value, that person has the same potential and that person looks just like me. Sometimes it's hard to conceptualize, especially for white people who have not really been around Black people, where this is one of my only few interactions. This is one of my own times having actual conversation and like, oh, okay, all right, I never thought that you would have been such like that. So those are the conversations that I have from time to time where I had a white woman prosecutor ask me, well, why don't Black people like the police? And this was in 2019. And, to me, I'm just like, this is a stupid question. But to her, that was a legitimate, like, I don't understand. They've been so friendly. And it's just a different perspective because she hasn't had to know or had to, kind of have that experience.
Yeah, I get the difference in perceptions of that sometimes. I speak like I speak. I always speak it. It doesn't matter who I'm around. So if you consider me talking super proper, I mean, this is how I talk anywhere. It's how I grew up. However, at the same token, I'm still going to have my ratchet moment and turn on some Gucci if I need to. And that's how I'm feeling. But I don't ever feel like I have to hide like any parts of my identity just to make anybody else feel more comfortable around me.
right.
Because it's just me. I don't understand how the music I play is different from what a lot of white children are playing right now. Everybody wants to be on this bandwagon of rap music or hip hop or whatever. Literally, like I'll say it, or I feel like, like anything like a Black person touches becomes gold. Everything. And that's like factual, and it can be proven through all of the things that have become popular in our, society. I just wish that like our pure spirit would be contagious as well, because we're not asking for, the death of white people, or, well, not all of us, you have some, and that's just being honest. But, we're not asking for that. We're not asking, for handouts. We're not asking you for super fake credit or anything. We're just asking for like, let's play how you play. That's all we're asking for. Walking into walking into a courtroom, you shouldn't have anxiety attacks not knowing how that judge is going to react to you when he sees you're Black. Walking into a prison, you shouldn't become nervous because you are Black and what African Americans make up 33% of the prison population, but 12% of like the regular population. How do we take over that number? And these are like issues that need to be addressed. I know that everybody stated that they feel that this is going to take time. This is going to take, work and patience. And, we have to get some of these judges out, and then DAs aren't stepping down until, their time is out and people won't go against them. But, like I said before, like conversation is very crucial of getting a better understanding of how all of these things work. But what exactly, what do you feel today is in your arm stretch of grabbing to where you can start making a change in this? I have entered into like signing myself up for conferences over with like SRCC with, the state, learning different things that they're doing for, release of individuals in the county, and then seeing the accountability factors of what they're doing to reincarcerate individuals right now. That's like what I can do. I can start a step in. I can hold those individuals accountable. They work for me. I pay tax money. I have access to you. So the only thing you have to do is ask yourself, what can I do that I hope to become like spread to become contagious, so we can start to begin to shift this change in treatment. So I'm becoming numb to waking up to these videos of us dying, yo.
Yeah.
And this needs to change. What are we gonna do?
I am doing a book study with some other ladies that it's me and white supremacy. And a few of them are educators, and one is not. She's just she's in hospitality. But just how do we like taking it started, I guess, as an Instagram challenge, but now it's a book, 28 days, and it digs into, you know, white supremacy and what we can do about it. And so also working with a coworker. I'm on the equity committee in the school system, and we're, as a part of the equity module, we are doing it's a 10-hour PD course, like professional development course that we're offering. And she and I are building the race module. And so we're working on that this month. So really digging into, in light of what's happening right now, just how needed that is, and digging into, there's a lot more conversation, dialogue that's really needed and prevalent as to what that module will look like.
Okay.
For me, I continue to hold white spaces accountable, especially in the environmental justice space, which is predominantly white. And what was interesting is that white people will use white supremacy as their basically the model. And there's things that is not so much white supremacy that is the issue. It is subtle discrimination, subtle biases that people do. So you'll say, well, I'm not a white supremacist, but yet you still do things against Black people. And I want people to understand that they shouldn't use that as a gauge, you know, well, I'm not that bad, so I'm still good. No, you can still be that bad and still not be all the way to the left. And that's the problem that we have in these environmental justice spaces, is that they'll use, you know, the worst of the worst situations and say, oh, I'm nothing like that. But, oh, you just fired a Black person because she told you that this was not right. Or one of my examples was I was put on a 90-day probation and was told I could not do the work in the community that I come from. And so to me, I was like, are you serious? That's a Black community. And so you're punishing me from doing the work in a Black community that needs it. And so I called it out. And not only did I call it out on the job, I put it out in the state. And so I don't need to tell you all what that ended up with me being, but I didn't mind losing the job because morals mean more to me than anything. And so now I'm in a space where I can be completely me, and I'm not working for any of them to be able to control how I eat. So, you know, just continuing to be who we are, calling out, you know, those things in these spaces, also being a resource to people who just don't know. My organization was reached out to from Henrico. They was like, look, we really just don't know. Can you please help us? And I appreciate those conversations, because people, if you can't hold folks accountable that don't know what they don't know. Like, come on now. So we do have some level of responsibility to help our allies to be the best that they can be, not only for us, but for themselves as well. If one white guy said, how are you holding me accountable for what my ancestors did? And I had to really think about that, because I do. And it's not fair, you know, because if they really want to help and they did not participate in that, why am I holding him accountable for what his great granddaddy did? And so having those conversations are extremely important. And I was glad he brought that to my attention, because I was holding all white people accountable for racism and their privilege, just by virtue of their grandfathers or great grandfathers may have participated in slavery. And I didn't even think about all of those white people who helped on the Underground Railroad to help us obtain some sort of liberation freedom. So it's just to continue to have those conversations, build those allyships, gain political power. And that does not mean that you have to vote to do that. We push that voting narrative a lot. It does not mean that you have to do that. I think to abstain is a powerful tool as well against the system, saying that we're not going to participate in your shenanigans anymore. And so I yield at that part.
Anybody else want to come close out?
So one of the things I think is important is building a different culture and building a critical mass of people who kind of think differently. It's one thing if you send one individual up or you send one elected representative up and you expect them to hold down the fort on all these different things. You need a critical mass or a team of people who are like, all right, this is the new paradigm. This is the why I'm thinking this way. So that way it's not just that one person fighting against everybody. They're going to need allies when we talk about transforming where we are. Some short-term things that I have to get out. We need to talk about Justin, I think Rep. Justin Amaj passed the bill, sponsored a bill talking about ending qualified immunity. We definitely need to talk about that and to kind of push that, vet that, because that's something that I never really saw coming into now, the end of qualified immunity. So the Supreme Court declined to hear cases on that, but those are things when those cases come up, people need to be at, bring attention to, bring that to your local representative. The more people we have shouting for this to end, the easier it is for this is to kind of be one step that kind of puts us closer to holding police accountable. We need to decriminalize marijuana. The war on drugs is basically a war on marijuana. You don't hear people talking about the odor of meth or the odor of cocaine. You hear them talking about the odor of marijuana, and then they search and find all these other things. And then you talk about, there was a graphic I seen from North Carolina School of Government, which said, I think like marijuana made up of like 77% of the rest when we talked about the war on drugs. And if you look at the statistics that we see on the open data police, you see that a lot of those black people being stopped at traffic stops and different things, those are the majority of the people who are making up those arrests. So we talk about decriminalizing it. We've already know the health side effects, no different than alcohol or cigarettes. We're talking about putting less people through the jail system, less people having records, less people who are filling up these jails. That's something smaller that I think kind of cycles in multiple places. Last part I want to talk about is just reducing officer contact with people for with everyday citizens for nonviolent offenses. So are there certain things that we can talk about, a citation? Can we do a sums instead of trying to physically put that person under arrest? And what are we arresting them for? As Mr. Shabazz said earlier, a lot of the laws, especially North Carolina, how far back do they go? There's a voter disenfranchisement law that still exists from 1891, which is 1898, which is reminiscent of the Wilmington riots, is kind of where that law came from. Look up the Wilmington riots if you don't know where that is. But basically, if you are on probation still, and there's a case in Hoke County where this young lady did not know, nobody said anything, she voted while she was on probation, and then they charged her with voter fraud, which is a felony. So that's a case that's kind of pending. And that law goes way back to right after the Wilmington Commission. And it was one of those things that was racially targeted towards keeping Black people from voting. So we have to not only look at the laws that we are trying to pass, but look at the laws that we have on the books. Where do they come from? Why do they arise? And that's where we can kind of start to make some of these big gains, even though that's not the whole story. We can push the ball down 10 to 20 yards. We still need to get 100 yards to score. But those are some of the immediate things that I'm working to do and push. And I'm trying to personally compile like a list of everything that people can do from moderate all the way up to more radical. We're talking about abolish on one end to kind of some incremental steps of reform in between. So that way everyone can at least push something so we can move the ball, whether it be 1 yard to 8 yards up to the finish line.
And do you have a website that people can look at just to check back in on any of that information with you?
I do not. I'm still working on that list because every day something new comes that I'm vetting, and I'm representing these protesters, which, everything new comes with the protests. So yeah, this has been a kind of a slow grind. I was hoping to have it today, but I'm not finished with it. But I'm not sure where to put that when I'm done with it. So
okay. I'd like to help you with that too.
Okay, so real quick, because I'm not trying to hold us on, we're going over a little bit, but I want to ask you a question. To the best of your ability, try to answer this, Dominique, yes or no? It's going to be hard. Do individuals going out protesting, reliant on the fact that there are multiple lawyers offering pro bono service if they get arrested, do they need to be reliant on those services?
No. So we've seen where, and we're having talk about this, where protesters being denied access to their attorneys or they're being delayed access to their attorneys. They need to rely on themselves and use their resources. However, if you get arrested at 2 or 3 in the morning, just generally speaking, the later the stuff goes on, I'm not sure what's going on in Raleigh, but in Charlotte, there is no curfew. And it seems as if the cops are taking advantage and waiting till crowds kind of thin out and making arrests around 12, 1. And that's typically when, you know, people are sleeping. So I wouldn't necessarily depend on an attorney coming to rescue you. However, due to, you know, Charlotte's in this movement where we're not really doing cash bail, a lot of people are getting unsecured bonds and they're kind of getting in and out for minor charges. So at least there's that positive. They should be using summons or citations. However, they are trying to take them to the indignity of locking them up and holding them. And then there's some locating you is also becoming an issue as well. So I would not want to rely on attorneys because there's a lot of things where you get people who are arrested and you can't even find out where they are. You're not giving correct information to the officer. You don't know if they're still in the car, if they're in the precinct, if they're in the jail. But at least in Mecklenburg County, they are unsecuring a lot of the bonds for smaller charges, such as failure to disperse. So there's that plus where, all right, it's going to cost you 6 to 8 hours of your life or potentially longer, but you know you're not going to spend but so much time in jail, which every minute is still a time that you want to spend there, but it's different between a minute and years.
Okay, I just wanted to get that quick fact out there. I knew it wouldn't stay at yes or no. I knew it. It was good. Okay, Chris, did you have anything you wanted to wrap up with?
I'm good for now because I can talk for another few hours.
Okay.
We're gonna definitely have to take it offline.
Garrett?
The only thing
Definitely want to hear from Garrett.
Sure. Yeah, the only thing I'll quickly add is that I'm focused on a lot on holding white folks accountable in this moment, particularly the ones who use woke language, and then go back to their spaces and then make arguments like the bad apples argument with police officers. Now, not everyone's bad, or they say something like, "Oh, I love protesting, but these looters and rioters, they just don't know how to like protest." And so, like, white folks need to be ready to understand those arguments and address them in real time, and build off of that. So one thing I'm focused on right now is mapping out HOAs and seeing who is trained in these particular communities to address these types of the space and these arguments that play out online and in person. And then politically, another thing is I'm trying to map out, I sent a request to a number of local officials who normally get overlooked. So school board members, county commissioners here in Wake County, town council and city council members, particularly town council members in suburbs, to just see where they stand on some general value statements, like institutional racism exists in our community. I'm committed to dismantling white supremacy. So we understand, they're on the hook for just getting benchmark of where they stand. And then the next step is coalition building. I think folks when they get passionate, they're really quickly, they're like, make that petition and throw it up there. But it really takes a lot of work on the ground, tapping into those who've been doing the work, and also coalition building to make sure that after you understand who are the players in the game, what are their like value statements, how do we then get them to be committed to doing the work that actually needs to be done and not just using Band-Aid solutions to get by. So I can go on, but I really appreciate y'all and the invitation and all the wisdom that's been shared.
And Hannah, did you have anything closing out?
No, I appreciate the call. I mean, hearing from everybody and learning, just continue this dialogue, as y'all said, taking advantage of the spaces that we're in and continue the dialogue and pushing it. We can't just sit idly by. So thanks for learning today.
Okay, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Next week, we will have another panel discussion, and I look forward to speaking to our panelists next week.